Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is Wednesday, January 28, 2026.
It is.
And I hope you've had your coffee or maybe something a little stronger.
Oh, definitely.
Because we have been staring at a stack of global reports this morning that, quite frankly, feels like it was written by two different species.
It really does.
Living on two completely different planets.
It's a tale of split realities, isn't it? I was going through the data dump from the James Webb Space Telescope, the JWST, specifically the JADES survey data.
Okay.
And we are looking at discoveries that just fundamentally rewrite the physics of the early universe. I mean, we were talking about concepts like dark stars and building synthetic human genomes.
It's pure science fiction stuff.
It's Star Trek level stuff, truly.
High-minded, futuristic even. Hopeful in a way.
Exactly. And then you put that tablet down, you pick up the geopolitical cables.
And the whiplash is immediate.
It's like being transported back to 1914. You have reports of trench warfare and freezing mud in Eastern Europe. You have the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom trying to, reset relations in Beijing.
While the President of the United States, Donald Trump, is on a microphone threatening to physically blow up Iran. It's
jarring. The contrast is unbelievable.
It is. We are literally mapping the invisible skeleton of the cosmos with one hand. And with the other, we're threatening to create a debris field in low Earth orbit that would trap us on this rock for a century.
That is the theme today, isn't it? The signal and the noise. We have this almost godlike technological capacity clashing head-on with these, almost medieval political instincts.
And our job, as always, is to try and synthesize it. We aren't just reading headlines for you here. We need to understand how a 250-million-year-old fossil explains why you can hear my voice right now.
Right, and why artificial intelligence is suddenly being taught to mumble to itself to get smarter. It's fascinating.
And we need to figure out why the price of gold has hit $4,000 an ounce.
Which is a terrifying number, by the way, a really scary indicator. But we'll get to the economy.
We will.
Yeah.
We will. But let's start with the stuff that makes you feel small in a good way.
I like that.
Let's go to space. Because a report dropped based on that JWST data that honestly sounds like it was ripped from a sci-fi novel, Dark Stars.
Dark stars. Now, before everyone starts picturing a Death Star or some evil void in space, we really need to clarify the name.
Okay, right.
These things, if they exist, and the new data is pointing very strongly in that direction, they would be incredibly, unbelievably bright.
So why call them dark? It seems counterintuitive.
It's because of what powers them.
Yeah.
And this solves a massive headache that cosmologists have been struggling with for a few years now.
The impossible early galaxy problem. I love that name.
It's very descriptive. Basically, when we use the Webb telescope to look back at the dawn of time, we're talking redshift 10, 11, maybe 12. So just a few 100 million years after the Big Bang.
The universe's baby pictures.
Exactly. And standard physics, our current models, they say the universe should be filled with, baby stars. Small, hot, gathering into little clumps, just starting out.
But that's not what Webb is finding.
Not at all. Webb keeps finding these monsters out there in the dark. We see galaxies that are far too bright and supermassive black holes that are way too big to have formed that quickly. The math just doesn't add up.
It's like walking into a nursery and seeing a fully grown linebacker shaving in the corner.
That is the perfect analogy. It just shouldn't be there. The physics of accretion, stuff sticking together under gravity, it takes time. A lot of time. Gravity is actually a very weak force.
So how do you explain it? How do you get a linebacker in the nursery?
Well, a team of researchers has proposed a solution that fits the data beautifully. They're saying those bright galaxies that Webb is seeing, they might not be galaxies at all.
There's something else?
They could be single, colossal stars. Dark stars.
Okay, so unpack the physics for us. A normal star, our sun, it burns through fusion. It's smashing hydrogen into helium that releases energy, and that energy pushes outward against the crush of gravity.
Right. It's a constant, delicate balance. But in the early universe, the composition of space was different. The density of dark matter was much, much higher than it is today.
Okay, the invisible stuff.
The invisible stuff. So the theory is that as these first massive clouds of hydrogen and helium tried to collapse under their own gravity, they were infused with these dark matter particles.
So they were mixed in with the normal gas.
Saturated with it. Now, here's the key thing about dark matter, at least the leading theory. It's its own antiparticle.
Meaning when two dark matter particles collide.
They annihilate. Poof. They turn into pure energy.
Heat and light.
A massive amount of heat. So think about this. Before the star can get dense enough and hot enough in its core to start nuclear fusion.
The dark matter inside it is already heating it up.
Exactly. The dark matter starts acting like a giant internal space heater. And that heat puffs the star out. It prevents the complete collapse that would normally trigger fusion.
So you get a star that is fluffy. Is that the right word?
Fluffy is a great word for it. You get a star that is gigantic, paradoxically cool on its surface for its size, and yes, very puffy. We're talking about a hypothetical object that could be 1,000,000 times the mass of our sun.
1,000,000 solar masses. That's the size of a small galaxy's central black hole.
And it could be 10 billion times brighter than our sun, all powered by dark matter annihilation in its core, not fusion.
That is just, it's mind-bending. It completely changes the definition of what a star is or what it can be.
It does, and it so elegantly solves the mystery. Webb sees these impossibly bright dots in the early universe. If they are dark stars, well, that accounts for the incredible brightness.
So it solves the too bright problem.
That solves the too bright problem. But here's the kicker. Here's the second part of it. Eventually, that dark matter fuel runs out. When it does, the internal heat source, the support holding the star up, just vanishes instantly.
And the whole thing collapses.
The whole thing collapses catastrophically under its own immense gravity. And because it's already 1,000,000 solar masses, it doesn't become a normal star or a neutron star. It collapses directly into a supermassive black hole.
Which explains why we see supermassive black holes so early in the universe.
Exactly.
They weren't born small and had to eat their way up over billions of years. They were just born huge.
They were born as linebackers, not as babies. It's an incredibly elegant solution to two of cosmology's biggest puzzles.
It implies that 27% of the universe, the dark matter part, it wasn't just this silent, invisible scaffolding.
It was an active participant. It was the architect of the very first large structures in the entire universe.
Wow, it's incredible. And speaking of cosmic structures, Webb didn't just look at the beginning of time. It also took a snapshot of a construction site a bit closer to home in the Serpens Nebula.
Ah, yes, the protostar EC53. This is a beautiful piece of chemical detective work.
It has to do with the comets, right?
Yeah.
In our own solar system.
It does. We've always had this paradox. If you look at comets, especially the ones from the really distant parts of the solar system, like the Kuiper Belt or the Oort cloud.
They're basically dirty snowballs. They formed out in the deep freeze of space.
They're made of ice, exactly. But when our probes analyze the dust trapped inside that ice, we find these tiny crystals, silicates, like olivine.
And olivine is a mineral that's born in fire. It needs extreme heat, like over 1,000 degrees Celsius, to form into a crystal.
Right. So for decades, the question has been, how do you get a crystal that was forged in a furnace inside a snowball that's been sitting at the edge of the solar system for 4.5 billion years?
It's a huge logistical mystery. How did it get from point A to point B?
And this image of EC53 is the answer. It's a snapshot of the process happening right now in another solar system. The image shows the young protostar heating up its inner disk of dust and gas, that's the furnace, creating the olivine crystals right next to the star.
Okay, so that's the furnace. But how do they get out to the snowball zone?
Because the star is so young and unstable, it has these massive bipolar outflows. It's like it's throwing a tantrum. These are powerful jets of gas shooting out from its poles.
And it's just flinging the crystals with it.
It's literally flinging these freshly baked crystals from the hot center of the solar system all the way out to the cold, distant fringes where comets are born.
It's a cosmic conveyor belt.
It is. It's a transportation system. It transports the hot materials out to the cold zone. It tells us that our own solar system, when it was forming, wasn't just a static, flat disk. It was a dynamic, chaotic mixing bowl.
I love that. So the comets we see passing Earth today could be carrying tiny crystals that were forged right next to our baby sun, and then, as you said, mailed to the edge of the system.
That's precisely what it suggests. It's a glimpse into our own solar system's baby pictures.
That's an amazing image. Mailed to the edge of the system. But let's bring it down to Earth, literally down into the dirt.
Okay.
Because while we're looking up at the stars, another story was about looking down at a fossil, a creature called Thrinaxodon.
Thrinaxodon lewerheinus. Yes, this is a snapshot from deep time. We're talking about the Triassic period, roughly 250 million years ago.
Okay, so set the scene for us. This is right after the Permian extinction, the Great Dying. The single worst catastrophe in the history of life.
The world is basically recovering. Life is starting to re-diversify. The dinosaurs are just getting started. They aren't dominant yet. And running around in the undergrowth is this thing.
What does it look like? Is it a reptile? A mammal?
It's something in between. Picture something about the size of a fox, maybe a cat, but with a mix of scales and maybe some early hair. It's a cynodont.
A dog lizard.
Effectively, yes. It's a cousin to the direct ancestors of all mammals, including us. And what's so exciting is that researchers have been using high-resolution CT scanners to look inside its skull without damaging the fossil.
And they found the origin of, well, my headphones. Or rather, the ears inside my head that let me use them.
They did. This is one of the most profound and beautiful examples of evolution repurposing a tool for a completely different function.
Okay, explain that.
So if you look at a modern reptile, a lizard, a crocodile, a snake, their lower jaw is made up of several different bones. It's a complex hinge.
Right.
But if you touch your own jaw right now, you can feel that it's one solid bone on each side. The mandible.
So where did all the other bones go? Did they just vanish?
They migrated. Over millions of years, as the main jaw bone, the dentary, got bigger and stronger to handle more powerful chewing, those little extra bones at the very back of the reptile jaw became, well, became redundant for chewing.
They weren't needed for the hinge anymore.
They weren't, so they shrank, they detached from the jaw, and they moved up into the skull.
And became the tiny bones in our middle ear.
They became the malleus and the inches, the hammer and the anvil, the tiny, delicate bones that amplify sound vibrations from your eardrum and transmit them to your inner ear.
That is just wild. So the machinery a lizard uses to chew its lunch, I'm using right now to listen to your voice.
Or to listen to this deep dive. That's exactly it. And Thrinaxodon, this fossil, it captures the moment of transition. The CT scans show those bones getting smaller, loosening up, starting to act less like a structural part of the jaw and more like a vibration detector.
It's the evolutionary aha moment.
It really is. You have to think about the environment. Early mammals were small, mostly nocturnal. They were hiding from the newly emerging dinosaurs. They didn't need a powerful bite force as much as they needed to hear the snap of a twig in the dark.
So it wasn't survival of the fittest, it was survival of the best listener.
Survival of the most sensitive ear. It's an incredible story of our own biological heritage.
It really puts it in perspective. We are just cobbled together from spare parts, aren't we?
We are.
But now we're trying to take that cobbling process into our own hands. Which I think brings us to the next topic. The synthetic human genome.
Yeah. This feels like we're crossing a major threshold.
This story is.
Yeah.
It's a big one. It's about Project NHG.
And we need to be very specific about what this is, because people hear synthetic genome and their minds immediately go to cloning or CRISPR.
Right. And it's neither of those things.
Not at all. CRISPR is editing. It's like taking a book that already exists, your DNA, and using a whiteout pen to fix a typo or maybe change a word.
It's gene editing.
It's editing existing biological material. This project is about writing the entire book from scratch.
Using what?
Using chemicals off a shelf. They're using a technique called polymerase cycling assembly. They literally take bottles of the base chemicals, sugar, phosphate, and the 4 nitrogenous bases A, T, C, and G, and they assemble them step by step into the 3 billion base pairs of a human genome.
So, no biological parents,
Yeah.
no sperm, no egg, just computer code converted directly into chemistry.
That's it. It's printing life.
Now, the scientists behind this argue it's purely for medicine. And you can see the logic. If you can print a specific gene sequence, you can put a cell line that's completely immune to HIV, for example.
Or you could print a liver cell that has a specific genetic defect you want to study. You could then test thousands of potential drugs on it without ever risking a human patient.
The medical utility is obviously immense. You could create universal donor cells for transplants that wouldn't be rejected.
The potential to cure or manage every single genetic disease is on the table, but the report rightly points out the massive ethical cliff we are now standing on.
It's the Gattaca scenario, isn't it? The movie.
It's exactly the Gattaca scenario, because if you can write the code from scratch, you can optimize the code. You're not just fixing diseases anymore, you are potentially designing traits.
Intelligence, height, athletic ability.
All of it. And who owns that code? If a biotech corporation synthesizes a human genome and grows it into an organism, is that organism a human with rights? Or is it a patented biological product?
It challenges the legal and philosophical definition of what it means to be alive.
We don't even have the legal framework for AI-generated art sorted out yet. We are nowhere near ready for the copyright implications of creating synthetic human life in a lab.
Well, speaking of AI and that spark of, well, not life, but intelligence, let's pivot to our next section, technology. Because there's a story here that connects strangely well to the way we humans think.
Ah, the AI that's learning to mumble.
Exactly. I love that term.
It's great. The technical term is chain of thought reasoning, but mumbling really captures the essence of it perfectly.
So how does it work? Because usually we think of AI as, I type a prompt, it instantly spits out an answer, it's a black box.
Right. And that's the standard model, which is a bit like human system one thinking. It's fast, it's intuitive, it's based on pattern matching. But researchers found that if you force the AI to engage in an internal dialogue before it gives the final answer.
An internal dialogue.
Yeah, literally generating a hidden stream of words where it breaks down the problem step by step and talks itself through the logic, it gets significantly smarter and more accurate.
It's like when I'm trying to do a complicated math problem in my head, if I just try to jump to the answer, I might mess it up. But if I whisper to myself, okay, first you carry the 1, then you multiply 300 by 10, which is 3,000, I'm much more likely to get it right.
That is exactly what is happening. It allows the model to reason and to error correct in real time. In that mumbling phase, the AI might generate a thought like, step 1 implies X. Wait, no, hang on, that contradicts the initial premise. Let me try path Y instead.
So it's simulating the stream of consciousness that humans use for complex reasoning.
It's moving AI from being just a very sophisticated parrot to something that's closer to a genuine thinker.
A reasoned thinker.
Yes, it integrates a kind of short-term memory with its processing. But there's a huge catch to all this.
It is.
Thinking takes energy.
It does. My brain runs on glucose. The AI runs on electricity.
A lot of electricity,
Yeah.
a staggering amount. And this leads us directly to Jan LeCun. He's a Turing Award winner. He's the chief AI scientist at Meta, formerly Facebook.
Right.
And he's launching a new startup, a new initiative focused on what he calls energy-based models, or EBMs.
What makes an energy-based model different from the LLMs, the large language models that we're all using today, like ChatGPT?
It's a fundamental shift in approach, really. It's about efficiency and logic. Current LLMs are autoregressive. It's a fancy way of saying they are constantly statistically guessing the next most likely word in a sequence.
It's a very brute force way to simulate intelligence.
It's incredibly brute force. LeCun's EBM approach is different. Instead of predicting the next word, an EBM looks at the entire set of variables in a problem and tries to find the configuration that has the lowest energy.
That sounds very abstract. What does lowest energy mean?
Think of it like a puzzle. An LLM tries to guess the shape of the next piece based on the last few pieces it placed. An EBM looks at the whole picture on the box and understands the physics of how all the pieces have to lock together to create a coherent image. Lowest energy just means the most logical, internally consistent answer.
So it's less about guessing and more about understanding constraints.
Exactly. The goal is to create AI that can learn from far less data and, crucially, use dramatically less power to do its thinking.
Because that power consumption is becoming a genuine crisis for the tech industry.
It is an existential crisis. The rate of growth is unsustainable. We are literally running out of juice to power the AI revolution.
And that is why Meta LeCun's own company is taking some really drastic measures.
This was a stunning report. Meta has signed contracts for 4 gigawatts of nuclear energy.
4 gigawatts. Let's put that in context for people. The Hoover Dam, one of the biggest hydroelectric projects in the world, produces about 2 gigawatts.
So Meta is effectively buying the output of 2 Hoover Dams worth of dedicated nuclear power.
Where are they getting it from?
They're buying it from next-generation nuclear startups like Oklo and TerraPower. And it signals this massive, massive shift in the landscape. Big tech companies are no longer just software companies.
They're becoming energy barons.
They're becoming vertically integrated energy barons. They realize the public grid is too old, too dirty, and just too unreliable to support their future plans. So they're going off-grid. They're building their own private nuclear-powered infrastructure.
It's wild. You own the code, you own the chips, and now you own the atoms that power the chips.
Total vertical integration.
But while we're building these massive, complex nuclear plants on Earth, we are making an absolute mess of the sky just above us. We have to talk about the Kessler syndrome.
This is the story that should keep you up at night. Seriously.
It's not a new idea. It's named after a NASA scientist, Donald Kessler, from the 70s.
Right. And the Kessler syndrome is the nightmare scenario where the density of satellites and debris in low Earth orbit, or LEO, becomes so high that a single collision triggers an unstoppable chain reaction.
Satellite A hits satellite B, that creates thousands of pieces of shrapnel, which then hit satellites C, D, and E, and suddenly the entire orbit is a high-speed blender of metal.
Exactly. And for years, it was a theoretical risk. But a new study just calculated the modern timeline.
And it's not good.
It is terrifying. If a significant disruption happens in one of the crowded orbital shells today, say a satellite breaking up, the time it would take for that to trigger a runaway cascade is now estimated to be only 2.8 days.
Less than 3 days?
Less than 72 hours. From Houston, we have a problem, to we are effectively locked out of space.
And people need to understand what that means. That means no GPS.
No weather satellites?
No Starlink internet.
Yeah.
No international communication satellites.
Okay.
No spy satellites for national security.
It would knock our global civilization back to the technology of the 1950s in a long weekend. The economic and social collapse would be almost instantaneous.
And yet, what are we doing? We're launching more and more stuff faster than ever.
We are. There was a story about Jorel, the big defense tech company. They're hosting a drone competition where jobs are the prize.
It's the gamification of the military-industrial complex.
It is, but what it highlights is the sheer speed and volume of this new era. We are flooding the zone, both low Earth orbit and the lower atmosphere, with thousands upon thousands of new autonomous systems.
And the regulation, the traffic control can't possibly keep up.
It's not even close. We are racing full speed toward that 2.8-day cliff edge, and everyone's fighting for a better view.
And we're doing all this while the geopolitical map on the ground is completely fracturing. Let's move to Section 3. Geopolitics, because the alliances we all grew up with, they seem to be dissolving in real time.
They are, and the epicenter of that shift this week, interestingly, is Beijing.
The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, is in China, and the press is calling it a thaw in relations.
Thaw is always diplomatic code for we desperately need money and trade. The UK economy is in very rough shape. We saw reports last week of nearly 4 million people in severe poverty in Britain.
So Starmer is under immense pressure at home to deliver some kind of economic growth.
And he can't get it from the EU, which is largely stagnant, and he can no longer just rely on the special relationship with the U.S.
Because the U.S. under President Trump is, let's just say, volatile.
To put it mildly, Trump has made anti-China rhetoric the absolute core of his foreign policy. He views any kind of friendly engagement with Beijing as a sign of weakness or even a betrayal.
So here you have Keir Starmer, the leader of America's closest historical ally, shaking hands with Xi Jinping in the Great Hall of the People.
He's walking a very dangerous diplomatic tightrope, and he explicitly said something that I think is very revealing. He said, the UK shouldn't have to choose between the US and China.
But from Washington's perspective, you absolutely do have to choose.
You do. And it's not just the UK that's hedging its bets. Look at the European Union. They just signed what's being called the mother of all deals with India.
This has been in the works for 20 years.
2 decades of negotiations. And the timing of it finally getting over the line is not an accident. The EU is actively pivoting. They know they're far too dependent on China for manufacturing.
And they're terrified of being hit by Trump's tariffs and sanctions.
Exactly. So they are looking at India as the great alternative, a democratic partner, a massive market, and a way to de-risk their supply chains away from China.
It's the strategic autonomy play we've heard so much about from Brussels.
It is. They are trying to build a genuine third pole in the global economy. They don't want to be a vassal state to either Washington or Beijing.
And you even see this anxiety playing out in the tech sector and in some stranger places. The story about Greenland is just fascinating.
Ah, yes, the buying Greenland saga, part 2.
Trump mentioned it again. He really wants to buy Greenland.
He floated the idea again, the U.S. purchasing Greenland or asserting some kind of control over it. And, it sounds absurd on the surface. You can't just buy a country with its own people in 2026.
But it's about the geography, isn't it?
It's all about the geography.
Yeah.
Greenland is the strategic key to the Arctic. As the polar ice melts, new shipping lanes are opening up. And underneath that ice are vast, untapped reserves of rare earth minerals that are crucial for all our technology.
And the reaction from Europe was telling. The president of France, Emmanuel Macron, immediately rushed to meet with the leaders of Denmark and Greenland in Paris.
They are seriously rattled. They don't see it as a joke. They see it as a direct threat to European sovereignty and security, and it feeds directly into this big push for a Eurostack.
Okay, what is a Eurostack?
It's the idea of creating a sovereign European cloud computing infrastructure. Leaders like Macron and the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz are realizing that if all of their government data, all their corporate secrets, all their citizens' information lives on servers owned by Amazon AWS or Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud,
then they are completely vulnerable.
they're vulnerable to what they call weaponized sanctions. They have a legitimate fear that a future U.S. administration could simply turn off their digital lights to force a policy change. It's a national security threat.
So the internet itself is fracturing along geopolitical lines. The economy is fracturing. The alliances are fracturing. Which brings us, I guess, to the places where things are actually breaking. Section 4. Global conflict zones.
And the Middle East remains by far the most dangerous flashpoint.
Right.
The language being used by leaders is just apocalyptic.
We mentioned it in the intro. President Trump, on record, warning Iran he would blow up the country if they attempted to assassinate him in retaliation for past events.
It's not a veiled threat. It's a direct threat of total war.
Yeah.
And it's being backed up by hardware on the ground. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group is now in the Gulf. This is a massive naval armada.
And where does that leave the Gulf states? Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar.
They are terrified. They are the buffer zone. They are the ones who will be caught in the crossfire. They know that if missiles start flying between the U.S. and Israel on one side and Iran on the other, their oil refineries, their desalination plants, their glass skyscrapers in Dubai, they are all primary targets.
So they're desperately trying to de-escalate behind the scenes.
Frantically. While at the same time, Israel seems to be locking in a much longer-term strategy with Washington. They're seeking a new, upgraded military pact with the U.S.
Moving beyond the standard annual aid package.
to joint development of new weapons systems. It's a much deeper integration. And at the same time, you have the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, joining President Trump's Board of Peace for Gaza.
Which critics, on the other hand, are calling a dummy board.
Right. The criticism is that it's a public relations move. It's designed to provide political cover for the ongoing military operations. It gives the appearance of a peace process without the substance of a ceasefire or real negotiation.
And speaking of long wars with no ceasefire in sight, Ukraine. It is January 2026. We are now entering the 4th year of the full-scale invasion.
And the conditions on the ground are just horrific. It's minus 12 degrees Celsius in Kyiv. That's about 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And Russia has launched another massive wave of missile and drone strikes on the power grid, trying to freeze the city into submission.
The human cost is just unimaginable. But there was one number in a report this week that it just stopped me in my tracks.
I know the one you mean. The casualty estimate.
A report citing Western intelligence estimates that Russia has suffered 1.2 million soldiers killed or injured since the start of the war.
1.2 million. It's a number so large it's hard to even comprehend. That is a demographic catastrophe for Russia. It's an entire generation of young men that has been wiped out or permanently maimed.
More than the U.S. lost in the Civil War, World War I, and World War II combined.
And you can see the strain on the Russian system. There was another report that the Russian military is now actively luring men from Kenya to come fight in Ukraine.
Recruiting in Africa.
Offering Russian citizenship, large signing bonuses. It shows that despite Russia's large population, they are running out of men who are willing to go into the meat grinder in places like Donetsk. So they're having to outsource their infantry to other countries.
And yet, despite all that, they are still managing to win the narrative war in other parts of the world. They just held a big grain forum in Dubai.
Yes, positioning themselves as the reliable food partner for the global south. The message is simple and effective. They're telling Africa, Latin America, and Asia, the West sanctions your food and fertilizer, we deliver it. And in many capitals, that message is working.
It's causing huge divisions inside Europe, too.
Yeah.
There was a quote from Sarah Wagenknecht, the German politician.
She has a way with words.
She called the European Union a trampled worm.
A trampled worm, yes. Her argument is that the EU is committing economic suicide by banning cheap Russian natural gas, only to turn around and buy much more expensive liquefied natural gas, or LNG, from the United States. She sees Europe as the primary economic loser of this entire conflict.
Before we leave the conflict zones, a quick note on Venezuela. The new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is now signaling a return of U.S. diplomats to Caracas.
It's a major policy shift, but it's complicated by the legacy of past actions. There's a fascinating lawsuit that's just been filed, the first wrongful death suit against the Trump administration regarding a counter-narcotics strike that killed several Trinidadian fishermen off the coast of Venezuela.
It's a reminder that these interdiction operations aren't clean video games. there are real-world consequences.
And the courts are now becoming the last line of defense for accountability, which actually segues perfectly to the domestic situation here in the U.S., Section 5.
The ICE memo. This is the story that has been dominating the American news cycle for the past week.
It is. An internal memo from ICE, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, was leaked. And it authorizes agents to enter private homes without a judicial warrant.
They're using something called administrative warrants. Explain what that is.
An administrative warrant is not signed by a judge. There's no independent judicial review. It's signed by another immigration officer within the same agency.
So the agency is basically giving itself permission to conduct a search.
That's it. And legal scholars across the political spectrum are going ballistic. They're calling it the Fourth Amendment moment.
The Fourth Amendment being the one that protects against unreasonable searches and seizures.
The very foundation of privacy in your own home. And the fallout from this memo is happening in real time. There's been huge protests in Minneapolis, Minnesota, after several ICE shootings there. The governor, Tim Walz, who's a Democrat, apparently got into a public shouting match with Tom Homan, who is Trump's very aggressive ICE chief.
But I think the most interesting reaction actually came from Silicon Valley.
It did, and it was very unexpected. The CEOs of two of the biggest AI companies, Anthropic and OpenAI, both publicly issued statements condemning what they called ICE violence.
Why is that so significant?
Because big tech almost never takes a side on controversial domestic policies. They want government contracts. They want the military deals with companies like Anduril. They want those nuclear power plants we talked about.
They want to stay neutral.
They desperately want to stay neutral.
Wow.
For them to speak out so forcefully against the administration's flagship policy suggests that the internal pressure from their own employees, their software engineers, must be absolutely overwhelming.
It's a culture clash. The progressive tech worker culture versus the hardline law and order culture of the administration.
And right in the middle of all this domestic turmoil, the Trump administration's signature project, the Golden Dome, just hit its one-year anniversary.
The Golden Dome. Remind us what that is.
It's a massive, ambitious plan to build a nationwide missile defense shield, kind of inspired by Israel's Iron Dome system, but on a continental scale.
And how's it going?
The report card is, well, it's incomplete. The reports note minimal progress. The ambition was huge, but the technological and financial reality is proving to be much, much harder than a campaign promise suggests.
It's harder to build a roof over an entire continent than it is to tweet about it.
Apparently so.
And speaking of things that are stalling or looking precarious, the economy. If you look at the stock market, the Dow Jones, it's choppy, but it's holding up. But if you look at the underlying fear gauge, it's flashing bright red.
Gold at $4,000 an ounce. Silver at $50 an ounce. These are all-time record highs.
And why does that matter so much to the average listener who doesn't own any gold bars?
Because you don't buy gold to get rich. Gold doesn't pay dividends. It doesn't grow a business. You buy gold for one reason. Because you are terrified that your paper currency is about to lose its value.
So it's a vote of no confidence in the dollar.
It's the ultimate safe haven asset. When gold hits a new record high like that, it means big money, institutional money, central banks, is betting on significant economic chaos ahead.
And some forecasters are being very explicit about it. Gerald Celente, the trend forecaster, is now predicting a major economic collapse in 5 months.
Now, he's a famous perma-bear. He's always predicting doom. But the underlying indicators are starting to align with his view. United Health, the massive insurance company, saw its stock tank because of proposed changes to Medicare, and that dragged the whole Dow down with it.
We're seeing cracks in the foundations of the healthcare sector, the insurance sector, and the currency itself.
And all the while, the gap between the rich and everyone else is just becoming a chasm. Oxfam released its annual report, and it found that billionaire wealth rose another 16% in 2025.
How much is that in total?
$18.3 trillion. Held by just a few thousand people. The ultra-wealthy are successfully insulating themselves from the instability and inflation that everyone else is feeling every day.
And no amount of money, of course, insulates you from the weather. Which brings us to our final section, the environment.
Nature always bats last, and it's hitting hard. We have reports of massive out-of-control wildfires in Patagonia in southern Argentina, thousands of acres burning in the Chubut province.
And here in the U.S., a bomb cyclone nor'easter is hammering the East Coast.
Right after another winter storm system killed 51 people across the Midwest and the South, the frequency and intensity of these 100-year events is now just It's an annual occurrence. It's the new normal.
And the political response to this crisis seems to be fragmentation yet again. Just look at the upcoming COP30 climate summit.
Brazil is hosting it, and they're coming in with a radical proposal. They're suggesting a two-tier climate system.
What does that mean?
They are completely fed up with the United Nations consensus model, where one country, like a major oil producer, can veto the entire global agreement.
So they want to break that gridlock.
They want to create a system where a coalition of the willing, the countries that actually want to take action, can move forward quickly on things like climate finance and carbon reduction and basically leave the slow-moving obstructionist countries behind.
It's the end of the dream of global consensus. It's every nation for itself, or save yourself if you can.
And the cumulative human cost of all of this, the wars, the economic instability, the climate disasters, it's measured in one stark number: displacement.
The latest figures are out.
120 million people are now forcibly displaced worldwide.
120 million.
It's a number that's hard to process. It is trips the number of displaced people after the end of World War II.
We look back at 1945 as the ultimate humanitarian crisis of the modern era.
And we are living in something that is 3 times larger in scale, but somehow it's become normalized. It's just become background noise in our daily lives.
It is. It's a very heavy picture when you lay it all out like that. We've gone from the birth of the first stars to the muddy trenches of Ukraine to the melting ice of Greenland.
It's a lot of noise. A tremendous amount of noise.
So, as we always try to do, let's try to find the signal in all that noise. And I keep thinking back to that AI story we started with, the mumbling.
The chain of thought.
Right. The AI got smarter, it got more logical, when it was forced to stop and think before it spoke. When it didn't just react to the prompt with the first thing that matched the pattern in its data.
And I think that is the lesson for us. Right now, as a species, humanity is operating on a zero-shot prompt basis.
What do you mean by that?
Something happens, a tweet, a missile launch, a market dip, and we react instantly. We escalate, we panic, we sell our stocks and buy gold. We don't pause.
We aren't mumbling.
We aren't mumbling. We aren't taking that crucial moment of internal dialogue to verify our own logic. We aren't asking the second-order questions like, wait, if I launch this swarm of satellites, does it trigger a cascade that traps me on my own planet?
If I sign this trade deal with China, does it fundamentally break my most important security alliance with the United States?
We need to integrate our own short-term memory, the painful history of the 20th century, before we output our next move in the 21st.
Because if we don't, we are going to stumble completely accidentally into that 2.8-day disaster window.
And we won't be able to undo it.
Well, let's hope we can collectively take that breath. There is so much beauty in the signal, the dark stars, the evolution of the ear, the crystals from a newborn sun. We just need to stop the noise from drowning it all out.
Beautifully said.
That's it for this deep dive. Stay curious, stay critical,
and keep thinking before you speak.
See you next time.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to The Debate. It is January 28, 2026. And if you look at a map of the world this morning, the physical borders, well, they haven't moved, but the lines of power connecting them are being, I think, violently redrawn. We're living through this rapid, real-time fragmentation of the traditional U.S.-centric global order. Now, the United States remains a military titan. Nobody disputes that. The tonnage of their aircraft carriers is what it is. But the rest of the planet, from the EU to India, China, Latin America, they're all aggressively hedging their bets. They're forming these new economic alliances and drawing red lines that would have been, frankly, unthinkable just 10 years ago.
And that is exactly where the danger lies. I mean, what you're calling hedging bets, I call a descent into just chaotic fragmentation. We are watching the erosion of a unified security architecture that, look, however imperfect it was, it kept a certain kind of peace for decades. When you strip away that structure, you don't get freedom. You get a scramble for survival in a power vacuum. The result isn't resilience. It's a terrifying increase in the risk of conflict, from the Arctic to the Middle East.
And that right there is the central question we're tackling today. Is this shift toward a multipolar world a necessary evolution, something that creates global resilience, or is it a descent into instability? I'm the advocate, and I'll argue that the diversification we're seeing, like this massive new trade deal between the EU and India, is a rational, stabilizing response to volatility. It's a path toward genuine global sovereignty where nations, stop looking for a savior and start building their own infrastructure.
And I'm the dissenter. I argue that this so-called diversification is really a dangerous illusion. When you have the U.S. president threatening to, quote, assert control over Greenland and the doomsday clock ticking down to 85 seconds to midnight, we are not seeing a stabilizing evolution. We're seeing a return to raw territorial power politics, where the strong do what they can and the weak, well, they suffer what they must.
I understand why the headlines make it feel that way. It's scary. But I think we need to look past the noise of the American rhetoric, which is incredibly loud right now, and look at the structural changes happening on the ground. I characterize this moment not as anti-American, but as pro-autonomy.
Autonomy is a lovely word. It sounds great in a manifesto. But autonomy without a security guarantee is just anarchy waiting to happen. You can't eat autonomy.
Okay, but you can eat the results of trade agreements. And that is where the framework is emerging. It's being built by the adults in the room who are simply bypassing Washington to get things done. I mean, we have to look at the news from just this week. India and the European Union have finalized what analysts are calling the mother of all agreements.
That's a big title for a piece of paper.
French cheese and Indian textiles. This is a comprehensive integration of markets between the world's largest democracy and the world's largest single market. They're reducing tariffs, yes, but the real meat here is that they are harmonizing standards on services, data privacy, and green technology.
Explain why that matters for the average person. Why is that so important?
It matters because standards are the invisible walls of trade. You see, if India adopts EU data standards, it creates this massive ecosystem that operates independently of U.S. regulatory frameworks. It proves that major powers can secure their own economic futures without waiting for permission or, participation from the United States. This is the definition of a safety net. If the U.S. economy catches a cold, or if Washington decides to impose 20% tariffs on everyone tomorrow, India and Europe, they don't have to get pneumonia anymore. They have their own circulation system.
See, I look at that same deal and I just don't see a safety net. I see a lifeboat. A safety net implies you have a system that catches you. A lifeboat is what you jump into when the ship is already sinking. You mentioned the EU and India, but let's look at the UK. Prime Minister Keir Starmer is in Beijing right now. Why?
Because he's a pragmatist who can read a balance sheet.
Or because he's desperate. Despite immense pressure from the US, the UK is prioritizing trade and engaging with China. They're refusing to choose binary sides. Is that strength? No. The UK economy is fragile. They're trying to navigate a world where their traditional ally, the US, is becoming erratic. Starmer isn't in Beijing because he wants to pivot east. He's there because he feels he can't rely on the West anymore. That's not a strategy. That is a scramble.
That's a very cynical take on what I see as a sign of maturity. Starmer's visit and his explicit statement that the UK shouldn't have to choose between the US and China is exactly how a sovereign nation should behave. I mean, why should London's economic policy be dictated by Washington's foreign policy? The binary us or them worldview is obsolete. And it's not just the UK. Look at the global south. We are seeing nations find partners based on tangible needs, not old ideological blocks.
Tangible needs is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Usually that phrase just means who will sell us food and fuel cheap, regardless of the blood on their hands.
Well, people need to eat. That is the most tangible need there is. Look at the data coming out of the Global Grain and Pulses Forum in Dubai. Russia is positioning itself as a, quote, reliable partner, exporting 50 million tons of grain to Africa and the Middle East last year alone. Now, you might hate the regime, you might hate the politics, but for a country in Africa facing food insecurity, that grain is a lifeline. That is the world building a system that doesn't rely on a single superpower's good graces.
I'm sorry, but calling Russia a reliable partner in 2026 it's a contradiction in terms. You cannot separate the grain from the geopolitical blackmail. While they are shipping that grain to gain leverage in the global south, they are launching major drone and missile attacks on Kyiv's power grid in the dead of winter. You call it a safety net, I call it enabling an aggressor. This is what happens when the old order fractures. We see a return to might makes right.
Look at the absurdity of the current diplomatic crisis in the Arctic. We have the U.S. president threatening to assert control over Greenland.
Which everyone knows is just rhetorical bluster.
Is it? Is it really? It's volatile enough that President Macron is currently hosting the leaders of Denmark and Greenland in Paris to establish red lines. Think about that. When your allies have to hold emergency summits to protect their territory from you, the system is broken. That isn't a multipolar order working, that's the alliance crumbling.
Or it proves that Europe is finally uniting to draw those lines themselves. But I want to pivot back to something you dismissed earlier, this idea of autonomy versus anarchy. You seem to think that without the U.S. holding the reins, everything falls apart. But let's look at technology. This is where the shift is most tangible, and frankly, most exciting. We are seeing a massive push, particularly from Europe, for digital sovereignty.
You mean the Eurostack?
Exactly. The European Parliament is moving toward the Eurostack. And we should probably explain this because it's vital. For our listeners who aren't deep into cloud infrastructure, think of it this way. Right now, Europe essentially rents its digital land from American landlords. Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud. All their data, their banking records, health records, government communications, it all lives on servers ultimately controlled by U.S. corporations subject to U.S. law.
Which are, to be fair, the most advanced and secure servers in the world.
But if the U.S. decides to change the locks or weaponize sanctions, or if a U.S. court demands access to that data, Europe is homeless. The Eurostack is a cloud system designed specifically to replace non-European providers. It is Europe building its own house on its own land. It's an immunity shield against that kind of extraterritorial reach.
It's a nice architectural drawing, sure. But have you considered the structural engineering? The IMF just issued a warning at the World Economic Forum. They said the global economy is dangerously dependent on AI and the underlying chip architecture. So if we fracture that tech stack, if we have a Euro stack, a China stack, an America stack, we aren't creating resilience. We are creating friction. We're breaking the very interoperability that drives global growth. You don't get better innovation by building walled gardens. You just get smaller, stupider gardens.
Or you get multiple engines of innovation. Look at China. Despite years of U.S. restrictions, they are clearing the import of NVIDIA H200 chips to bolster their own AI sectors in healthcare and automotive. They're finding ways to keep innovation moving despite the blockade. A world with multiple centers of power, multiple engines, is harder to stall than a world with just one. If the U.S. engine fails, the European and Asian engines, well, they can keep running.
You're glossing over why they want those chips. China isn't just buying NVIDIA H200s to make better video games or diagnose cancer. They are strengthening alliances with Russia specifically to counter U.S. military and economic pressure. This isn't friendly market competition like Pepsi versus Coke. It is the formation of digital fortresses, and the markets know it. Sure, NVIDIA might be overtaking Apple as TSMC's top customer, but the geopolitical risk around these supply chains is skyrocketing. If a conflict breaks out over Taiwan, which is the elephant in the room here, that multiple engine world you describe grinds to a halt instantly.
I think you're conflating economic autonomy with military aggression. They are not the same thing. You can build a sovereign cloud without building a war machine.
In 2026, a sovereign cloud is a war machine. Data is the oil of the century. Control the data, you control the targeting systems.
But let's look at how regions are solving problems without resorting to conflict. There's a lot of soft power bridging these gaps that the headlines ignore. The 2026 Russian Dance Festival in India is a great example of cultural exchange continuing despite these tensions. It shows that, human connection persists.
Dancing doesn't stop drones.
It keeps channels open. Or look at Latin America. We are seeing a push for dignity and legal sovereignty that is long overdue. Ecuador is strengthening consulate security in Minneapolis after that attempted assault.
I mean, security at a consulate is a remarkably low bar for solving problems.
It's about the principle of a state protecting its citizens abroad against a superpower. And look at the legal pushback. This is fascinating. There's a wrongful death lawsuit being filed against the Trump administration regarding the Trinidadian men killed in that military operation. That is the world saying, we will hold you accountable using your own legal systems. It's lawfare, not warfare.
And in Europe, Spain is taking a humane, independent approach to migration, legalizing 500,000 undocumented migrants. They aren't following the U.S. model of aggressive raids. They're charting a path that fits their needs and their values. That is regional autonomy at work.
I see where you're going, but I come at it from a different angle. You point to Spain's migration policy as autonomy, but I look at the broader picture and I see regional solutions failing to stop violence. You mentioned Latin America. We are hearing rhetoric about a Cuban Missile Crisis 2.0. The Trump administration is reportedly seeking regime change in Cuba. The U.S. House just killed a bill that would have limited military use in Venezuela. This proves that despite all this talk of autonomy, the U.S. is doubling down on intervention in its own hemisphere. The region isn't solving its problems, it's being squeezed.
But the pushback is louder now. That's the difference. In the past, that pressure would have been met with silence. Now it's met with lawsuits and strengthened consulates. The cost of intervention is rising.
Is the pushback working, or is it just creating more noise while the bombs fall? Look at Ukraine. We are 4 years into this war. 4 years. Russia is launching major strikes on power facilities in sub-zero temperatures. Autonomy in this context just looks like prolonged suffering without a global enforcer to broker peace. And let's not forget the doomsday clock. It didn't move to 85 seconds to midnight because of climate change alone. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist explicitly cited these aggressive policies and the lack of arms control. A multipolar world where everyone has a gun but no one is the sheriff is not a safer world.
I see the risk, obviously. I'm not ignoring the doomsday clock, but I argue that the sheriff you're nostalgic for was often the source of the instability. The alliances forming now are more pragmatic. They're based on mutual survival, which is a powerful motivator. Even U.S. allies are standing their ground in a way that feels new. Look at Canada.
Canada?
Yes, Canada. Prime Minister Mark Carney. Reports say he practically rolled his eyes at the U.S. Treasury Secretary during the last summit. He told President Trump flat out that he meant what he said at Davos about trade diversification. He's refusing to walk back talks of new trade agreements just because Washington threatens tariffs. That is a neighbor acting like a sovereign nation, not a vassal state. It's Canada looking at the global map, not just the North American map.
And that tension is exactly my point. When Canada and the U.S. are trading insults instead of goods, the North American bloc weakens. When neighbors stop talking and start posturing, the neighborhood gets dangerous.
No, that tension is healthy. It forces a relationship based on respect, not dependency. And it's contagious. Look at the European populists. These are leaders who were formerly ardent Trump supporters. Now, they are rejecting his rhetoric on Greenland. When the U.S. pushes too far, it doesn't fracture the world. It unifies the rest of the world against that overreach. That's a stabilizing force. It creates a balance of power.
I think you're mistaking temporary alignment for stability, for true stability. These alliances are incredibly fragile. You mentioned Canada standing up, but look at Israel. They're moving in the exact opposite direction. They're seeking a massive military pact with the U.S. because they know they cannot stand alone. They're prioritizing that security guarantee over everything else, even while facing global condemnation for demolishing UNWRA headquarters. That is not the behavior of a nation that believes in a multipolar safety net. That is a nation bunkering down behind the superpower because they know the storm is coming.
Israel is a specific case, though. I mean, the geopolitical dynamics there are unique.
It's a case that proves the rule. When push comes to shove, nations want hard security. The UK and EU are forced into these diversification positions out of desperation, not strategy. The German economy is struggling. The EU is described by some as a trampled worm on energy dependency. They are reacting to high energy costs and reliance on U.S. gas. A world where every nation has to fend for itself or form temporary cliques to keep the lights on is inherently less stable than one with clear leadership. We are trading dependence for danger, and the transaction costs are going to be conflict.
I disagree fundamentally that it is desperation. I think it is an awakening. So, to summarize my position, the events of January 2026, from the India-EU mother of all agreements
to the development of the Eurostack prove that the world is capable of moving beyond a unipolar reliance. We are witnessing the painful, yes, but necessary birth of a truly global network, where Latin America, Asia, and Europe assert their own interests. This isn't anti-Americanism, it is the maturation of the rest of the planet.
And to summarize my view, while the shift is undeniably real, the cost is unacceptably high. The risks of conflict in the Arctic over Greenland, the naval buildups in the Middle East, the freezing winters in Ukraine, they are all rising because the old security guarantees are evaporating. We are seeing the return of great power competition without the guardrails of the last century. We are trading a flawed order for chaotic disorder.
Right. Regardless of whether you see this shift as a birth or a collapse, one thing is clear. The planetary perspective is now the only one that really matters. No single nation dictates the narrative anymore.
On that, we can agree. The variables have changed, and everyone, investors, voters, leaders, needs to update their calculus.
We invite you to look closer at the source material, read the details of that India-EU deal, look at the reports on the Eurostack, and decide for yourself.
Thank you for joining the debate.
Goodbye.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.